Let's move on to the third presentation by Ben Phillips. So Benjamin Phillips is a survey researcher and methodologist with 19 years of experience in academic and private sector positions, working with government and non-profit clients. He is Chief Survey Methodologist at the Social Research Centre, Australia, where he applies best practices and develops new methods to reduce survey errors and costs. He works on Live in Australia, Australia's only probability-based online panel. Prior to joining the Social Research Centre, Dr. Phillips was a senior associate scientist at Abt Associates and previously worked for Abt, SRBI, and Brandeis University. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully that is showing up, and I will. So thank you very much again. So I want to acknowledge my so I want to acknowledge my co-authors, particularly to Charles Dove, who's up bright and early with me this morning, and our senior methodological advisors, including Paul Lavrakis, who I see is on. So just to begin with, a few words about Life in Australia. So it is Australia's only probability-based online panel. So we run on a wave model, so fielding surveys once a month. Originally, the panel, when we established the panel, it was sized to be able to complete at least 2,000 surveys per month. Subsequently, we've grown it to be able to complete at least 3,000 per month. Our aspirational target length is 15 minutes or under. Clients don't necessarily always, aren't always able to stick to that, so our incentives get incremented above 20 minutes. So while I call it an online panel, that's a slight misnomer. We do include offliners via telephone. They're a bit under 5% of completes in the most recent wave. And I should point out that not all of them are true offliners. Some of the people who could, but won't complete surveys online. And finally, the idea, I think in common with a lot of panels, was to provide government, academia, and non-profits with essentially affordable probability sample. So just a brief history about recruitment, because I'm going to be talking about recruitment, so it's got a kind of relevant to where our existing panel came from. So when we originally recruited in the fourth quarter of 2016, we used dual frame RDD. When time came to replenish in mid-2018, we switched over to purely cell phone RDD. We did that for a few reasons. So cell phone helped us out with our age profile. It was quite a bit older than the population at large, so cell phone helped there. Slightly too heavily female, cell phone helped us there. The panel's also quite too heavily over-representing the highly educated. Unfortunately, in Australia, cell phone did not help us there, certainly kind of contrary to the situation I was used to in the US circa 2017. Late 2019, we switched to from RDD to address-based sampling. So we do the switch to ABS. So we're originally planning to run RDD and ABS in parallel, but telephone response rates really dived during the course of 2019, and by November, December, it was just looking to be economically infeasible to use telephone-based recruitment. So fast forward to late 2020, we used ABS and some more innovative methods that I'll mainly be talking about. So we were originally, for the 2020 replenishment, just going to use ABS. We figured, okay, great. So we'll use the third and final the design from the third and final replicate in 2019. The only thing we tried that was really in any way different was an incentive experiment, basically to see if we could get away with being a bit cheaper. What we saw was that yields had dropped really quite a lot, proportionally speaking, and not all of that is explainable by the incentive experiment. So, and I should say that this doesn't appear to be pandemic induced. Generally speaking, our response rates across other modes have held up reasonably well. So it is a bit of a puzzle. Now, so I'm going to talk about some things which would be illegal in the US. I'm going to point out that we're not, in fact, a bunch of scofflaws. We can, in fact, do that in Australia. So we are able to legally send unsolicited SMSs for research, and we can legally auto-dial cell phones. So one of the things, well, we noticed that we were underachieving with the ABS replenishment. We had some internal developmental trials, so developmental in the sense that they were meant to inform future recruitment to the panel, but we're not actually recruiting to the panel using IVR and SMS push to web. So what we noticed was we were getting some really good age profiles. Country of birth also was looking really good. Education was, if anything, looking worse than normal, and we already know in most cases it's quite bad, and the response rates were not looking terribly good either. Now for IVR, so we know that it's being used in the probate panel in Canada, and it appears to be quite cost effective for them. SMS push to web, I'm not necessarily aware of or hadn't been aware of any use of it. I did see that in the Healthy NYC panel, so perhaps I'm wrong there, but anyway, so that seemed to be a bit of an innovation for recruiting to probability panels. So in terms of sampling frames, so for ABS, we use the authoritative list of addresses in Australia. Now we know from prior experience that addresses that aren't contributed by the post office tend to have, or not matched to the post office list of addresses, have low yield. So if you take that into account, we get coverage at about 96% of residential addresses. For IVR and SMS, we use a cell phone RDD sample provided by the last remaining RDD sample vendor in Australia. 95% of Australians have cell phones. We use, so the provider does a working number lookup that has a 1% false negative rate. When you take that into account, coverage is estimated 94% of the population. So really just two quick takeaways. So one is that they're both quite high coverage frames and that they are comparable in terms of coverage. So workflow, so ABS, very simple. We sent an invitation letter, a reminder postcard. If we could match the address to a phone number, and 42% of cases we could, of course, not all of those were accurate, we made reminder calls, and then everybody who hadn't enrolled got a reminder letter. For IVR, we send an advance SMS to warn people they're going to be called by a robot, and we do that because, well, we get scam calls and they use recorded voices. We made a maximum of 4 call attempts. The IVR content was pretty minimal. It was really just enough to explain what was being asked of people as briefly as we could. And if people agreed, they got an SMS link to the profile to complete online. For SMS, we just sent an advance SMS, an invitation, and a reminder, both with unique links. And in return for joining, people got either 15 or 20 Australian dollars. And as I mentioned, we had a trial going on. So in terms of the results, so recruitment times the profile rate gives us basically our yield from recruitment. So for ABS, it was 6.6%, as said before, so not certainly much as one would like. SMS was about half that, and IVR was about half as much again. So we're talking certainly quite, very low response rates. In terms of performance, the one wave we've got out of field thus far. 80% of those who'd enrolled completed, roughly 80% completed for the ABS and the interactive voice response samples. SMS was a bit under that at about 72%, and proportionally, they sort of still fall out the same as the recruitment yield. All right, so now on to profile. So as mentioned, the panel is quite a bit older than the population at large. IVR and SMS both get us considerably younger. IVR is pretty close to the population at large. SMS is quite a bit younger than the population. That might be a problem in the cross-sectional survey, but given we have continuing panel members, that is really attractive. Education, so as mentioned, again, more highly educated than the population at large. SMS was even more highly educated again. Country of birth, so this is another bit of sort of good news from this. So we do overrepresent Australian born among continuing panelists that we do interview in English only, so it's somewhat understandable. IVR and SMS both had significantly fewer Australian born, which is a good thing for our panel, particularly the case for SMS. So as I start concluding, So on to cost. So the relative cost of recruiting from SMS and IVR was only about a quarter of that of address-based sampling. Now, if you're a client and listening, I do hasten to point out, savings won't immediately come through. We need to amortize that across a several year period, but quite a bit less expensive. So I'm going to skip the summary in the interest of time and just talk about next steps. So we need to make our minds up because we've, in terms of mode, because we have an expansion scheduled in the second half of this year. We've got a few trials just to see if we can treat the IVR and SMS recruitment for better profile and rates. But really the trade-off that we're looking at is trading off headline response rate against cost and profile. Obviously education, not so positive there. So feedback is welcomed. And at that point, as I am out of time, I do want to thank you very much for your kind attention.
Many thanks, Ben, and your timing is impeccable. So anyone has questions, either in the chat or someone else? First question is, in one of your slides, is a 5% responded by CATI due to non-response follow-up? Or do you have people designated as offline only that you call for each survey?
So we have people who essentially, yes, we have people who are designated as offline. Some people, there is a bit of movement into and out of the offline pool. So if, for instance, somebody's email address starts bouncing, we would switch them over to, they would be an onliner who moved offline. And we do have people who occasionally will start providing us an email address who were formerly offline respondents and will go online. So there's a little bit of churn, but basically it's fairly stable.
Okay. Any other questions? So we can have a conversation about the three presentations. There's one question that I have, I guess to all three of you really, which is that it's these are all panels, right? So that means that you collect data over time. So whenever you do a new survey, you already have earlier information available. How systematically are you using that information? Is it available for anyone who wants to do a new survey? Do they have access to the earlier data, or is it just a new start each time there's a new survey?
Well, certainly I can start there. So we're a commercial panel. So although we're owned by a university, the profits go to the university. So we work on a client basis. So we don't, so the data remain the property of the client. So generally, and it's interesting, most of our clients, even those who field repeat surveys on us, have tended to treat it as cross-sectional, which, you know, it's something of a puzzle to me, because they can get potentially some rich information within subjects analyses out, but generally they haven't done that. The exception is the Centre for Social Research and Methods at the Australian National University, where they have fielded probably goodness, about a quarter of our waves have been for them, and those will in fact include, where, you know, they use those in longitudinal fashion.
Okay, thanks. Ricardo, you want to jump in?
Yeah,
yeah, there you go. Yeah,
yeah, okay. Same thing here. We have I would say most of our clients are well, we just started, so we have few clients, but most of them are very interested in cross-sectional uses of our panel. Usually academics are more into longitudinal studies, and usually 3 waves, no more than that, because, well, you know, they need to get published, and they need to, you know, be accountable of their resources there, of the fund that they are getting. So but again, it's kind of strange, because well, we try to convince them that this is very good, you know, like for measuring change, which is something we are very interested in Chile. You know, like our society is going through massive changes, not just for COVID, but because of the social crisis that I told you about. But again, it's been difficult to convince them that this is worth it.
So if data are collected, are they then also available to others, or are data always owned by whoever paid for the survey?
You mean in Chile or
In Chile, yeah. I mean, well, like,
Oh,
and any of you can answer, but since you were talking, I'm asking.
Oh, okay. Well, it depends. Usually, academics are when they use it and they publish the paper, they don't care about the data and they just publish it. But for private companies, they own the data and they're not interested in for any other in their usage for any other reason than their own reason. You know.
Okay, I see. Ben, I saw you switched on the camera, so I wasn't sure if you wanted to jump in.
Oh, so I just had left the camera on.
Okay,
I
sure,
think I addressed that. Yeah.
Any other comments people have? Any other questions?
There are questions in the chat which are very interesting.
Now you're right. Now I see them. Yes, okay. There was a sort of drought, but now I see a whole bunch of them. That is all right. So here's the first one of the new ones that came in. So are the three surveys, ABS, IVR, SMS, mutually exclusive? If not, how did you deal with the overlap of respondents?
So I think that's directed at me, so I'll answer that.
Looks like it, yes.
Yes, so IVR and SMS were mutually exclusive. So we have an RDD sample for both of that, and basically we divided between the two. Potentially, yes, that overlaps with the address-based sample. So that's not mutually exclusive, and it really can't be because we don't have good linkage of cell phones to addresses. So I think in reality, given the amount of sample we had, the likelihood of overlap is, well, the likelihood of getting the same respondent is minimal. So yeah, I think it's probably a non-issue.
So the next question is also about SMS. Whether you tried that before and what are the response rates? Are they as expected?
So, yep, absolutely. So we had not tried SMS recruitment before. So this was the brainchild of Chief Statistician Dina Niger. I must admit I was really skeptical under the theory, well, if it had worked, somebody would have tried it before. So really the only time we tried it was in the brief developmental trials before. And what we saw, I mean, the response rates we saw for recruitment to life in Australia were basically reasonably representative of what we saw the trials before, probably a little bit lower because it's a bit of a more difficult ask to get people to respond to join a panel than to respond to a one-time cross-sectional survey.
Right, and then there's another, I think again related question, generally about what approaches to maximize response and recruitment, and I guess we can take this as a general question that can be asked to all three of the presenters.
Right. So yeah, so it looks like the question was directed. So I think as I sort of showed on the slide, there was in fact an advanced SMS for the SMS recruitment, and there were, as I showed on the slide, either a $15 or $20 conditional incentives, and the question about whether mobile numbers were appended with geodemographics. To be honest, and my experience with the quality of appended geodemographics in Australia is they're rubbish would be too strong a word, but not of particularly high quality or accuracy.
All right. And I believe, Ricardo, you said something about the effect of incentives. You called it a puzzle, and I think you saw a pretty strong effect of giving a lower incentive. Is that right?
Yeah, and again, it's a mystery to me at the moment because it was obvious that the agreement to join the panel was gonna fall, and it fell 20 percentage points. So that was totally expected, but response rates are very similar. So, and that's very strange. I don't know why. I tend to think that sometimes they are related to the topic at hand. And usually we have seen, and mostly last year, we've seen high response rates in surveys about COVID and just COVID. And it was very, very interesting. And all those issues involving mental health and all COVID related things, very, very high response rates. But in other topics, it's just a similar thing. So we usually, and the thing is that we recruited on the back of 2 surveys, so that's a point as well. So they think, oh, I'm getting questions about COVID. I'm very interested in participating on this, and well, when there's a different topic, of course, they're not that eager to participate. So I think that's very important as well.
Okay, thanks. Any further comments for the general discussion? So we're running a little ahead of time, but Tara, I think we can just continue with the next session.